it and play on 2nd and 10. That's his youth right there.
Tagovailoa trying to make up for it. Fires to the end zone. Touchdown! Alabama wins!
And that was just the beginning.
They might go for one right here, and he will, much like the championship game. Touchdown! The same guy.
Tagovailoa from the pocket launches to the end zone. Caught in stride for a touchdown by Jerry Jeudy.
Yeah, Nick says everybody runs away from him. This guy's special. He's different. On and off the field. Down the middle of the field is Jerry Jeudy. Who else? For the score. 81 yards on the second play from scrimmage. Make it 7 for 7.
On 3rd down and 7. What do you expect? You think he was going to throw an incomplete pass on 3rd down? Irv Smith.
Now, this would continue for about a year and a half, and you might be wondering, why not 2 years? Why is it a year and a half? That's a pretty odd time frame. Well, as you can see on the screen right now, Tua started carving up Mississippi State.
I think we're going to see Tua as long as this game is tight, but I really think Nick Saban wants to bring in Mac Jones if they can get a significant lead.
3rd down and 10. Push back to their own 45. Good protection. And the throw is a beauty of a ball. Jerry Jeudy. And Tagovailoa just laid it in there perfectly. Here's the left-hander. Tua Tagovailoa. Down the sideline. Touchdown. Well, that was creative. Jalen Waddle. 35-yard score. And Bama made that look really easy.
It was said that Mac Jones was going to come in once they went up big. Tua was still in the game when they were up 35-7.
All right, Matt, we might have jumped the gun a little bit on putting Tua's day to bed. Tua Tagovailoa is still in there. That's Brian Robinson looking for more in the final 3 minutes of this first half. Comes out throwing. On the run. Pressure from behind. And that's where Nick Saban is thinking, where's Mac Jones?
He's down, and Tua's down. His helmet came off. This is exactly what you did not want to see happen, and sometimes as a coach, you just got to listen to your gut, and I think Nick wanted to take him out, and Tua talked him back into it, and hopefully this isn't serious.
It turned out that injury was serious, as that tackle caused his hip to dislocate, as well as suffering concussion and broken nose. He was subsequently carted off the field and underwent surgery just 2 days later. The catastrophic incident ended his 2019 campaign, and later the following year, Tua announced he'd forego his senior collegiate season and enter the 2020 NFL entry draft.
With lots of prayers, thoughts, and guidance, I have decided that I will be declaring and entering the 2020 NFL draft.
Hello? Tua.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Tua.
Yes, sir.
Tua. Hey, it's Chris Greer. Chris Greer from the Dolphins.
What's up, Chris?
How you doing, man?
Doing good. How you doing?
Well, we enjoy getting to know you through the process, and you love how you play on the field, how you carry yourself off the field, the type of person that you are and player, and we're excited here to make you Miami Dolphin, man.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate you guys, man.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Man, you did a great job, and you attacked everything and like you did, and like you did. Loved your story, and you've done a lot of work on you. And Coach Flores, our owner Stephen Ross, get on the phone with him next, and we couldn't be more excited to have you here, man. So,
man, I appreciate it.
Step one.
Yes, sir. No, I appreciate it, man. I can't wait to get this thing rolling.
Are you as excited as we are?
I think I'm more excited than you guys are.
I don't think so.
With the 5th pick in the 2020 NFL Draft, the Miami Dolphins select Tua Tagovailoa, quarterback, Alabama.
Well, there it is, which means for the first time since Kellen Moore, who is now the Cowboys' offensive coordinator, threw a pass, we're going to have a left-hander who's going to throw a pass in the NFL.
And there we go. Now you're basically all caught up. Tua was one of the best quarterbacks in Alabama history and was subsequently drafted 5th overall by the Miami Dolphins. Now, since then, people have mixed feelings about Tua, and I really want to talk about that because I think if you watch the games and if you follow the team specifically like I do, I'm a Miami Dolphins fan, you know how good Tua really is, and you know how good he can be because you know all the shortcomings of the people around him, the coaching around him, and everything that's gone on within the organization. Now that we've got all that out of the way, let's do a deep dive into Tua Tagovailoa and why I think there's a misconception surrounding him. So with that, let's begin. Now, I think that this will help some people understand more why Tua performed how he performed and why Tua did what he did and how Tua still put up decent stats and still played very, very solid considering the stuff he had to deal with, because I don't think people know what he had to deal with. And that's what we're going to get into, and that's why I think there's this whole misconception about Tua and how he's played. First, we'll begin with his hip surgery and his hip injury, which continued into the season. It's the reason that he didn't start from the beginning and why the team waited for the bye week to finally start him. The bye week moved up because of other COVID issues, and that actually moved up to his timeline, even though he was still rehabbing his hip injury. This means that he couldn't train like other rookies, and like anyone else for that matter, because he was still rehabbing his hip. And we all know how important chemistry is with receivers and quarterbacks, and Tua got no reps in with any receivers, and he couldn't do any offseason training because he was too busy rehabbing his hip.
I think so much is him expecting the ball to be a certain place and me expecting him to be a certain place. And I think the chemistry between a quarterback and a receiver, a quarterback and a tight end is so important because, you know, it's all anticipation. If you're waiting for things to happen in the NFL, you're too late.
Next thing I wanted to talk about was Chan Gailey. He was hired out of retirement specifically for Ryan Fitzpatrick, and he did not fit with Tua's play style at all, and the only reason he did come out of retirement was to coach Fitz. So when Tua became the starter, there was a huge disconnect there, and there's a reason where he got fired/retired after his first season, after Tua's rookie season, because the play calling was absolutely horrid, and it was clear that he was meant for Fitz, and the only reason he came out of retirement was for Ryan Fitzpatrick. So the playbook was atrocious, the play calling was atrocious, and that was just a horrible start for a rookie quarterback. Then we get to the run game, which we all know is important for a rookie quarterback. I mean, if you don't have it, they tend to struggle, and again, you want to be able to rely a little bit on your running game to kind of ease quarterbacks in. And again, a guy like Tua is coming off injury. You really want him to not have to throw the ball that much. But in our case, we literally had no run game.
If they're telling you to run the ball on defense, you know, with their look, and you run the ball and you're successful, and then they say, okay, all right, we're tired of that. Now you got to throw it, and you throw it and you're successful. That's when you're, you can be at your best and really make it tough on defenses.
Gaskin started just 7 games and had just over 500 yards. Ahmed had 6 games played and only put up 300 yards. And Breida played 12 games and only put up 254 yards. Then it's Tua in 4th for team rushing yards. So there was absolutely no run game for Tua to work with. Then we get to the receivers, which is a whole other issue. So at the beginning of the season, the depth chart looked like we'd have Devontae Parker and Preston Williams as our top 2 receivers, which isn't great. I mean, it's not horrible, but it's not great. But actually, he didn't have them either because they were hurt too. Devontae played 11 games and Preston played 7 games, but again, most of those were at the beginning when Fitz played, so Tua only played like 3 or 4 games with them, if that. And that meant his only receivers was Mac Hollins, Isaiah Ford, Malcolm Perry, Jakeem Grant, and Lynn Bowden. Those were his starters, Mac Hollins and Isaiah Ford. Isaiah Ford, who got cut by the Patriots, who had the worst receiving core in 2020. They had the worst receiving core, and Isaiah Ford got cut by them, and he started for us. Not to mention, we led the league in drops. I mean, when you're putting out talent like that, it's not surprising, but we led the league in drops. How do you expect a rookie quarterback to do well when he can't even trust his receivers? Someone calculated against the last game against the Bills, Tua could have had over 450 yards passing and maybe more if the balls that he threw weren't dropped. He threw 12 drop passes, and if they were actually caught, he would have thrown over 450 passing yards. That's just a little stat to convey to you guys how bad it really was. Then we get to the O-line, which is another horrible thing that he had to deal with. Austin Jackson, who is a rookie, he was super raw coming out of the draft, and he's horrible now. He's still horrible. Eric Flowers was okay. If you're being generous, he was pretty bad. I mean, he was below average for sure. Ted Karras was below average. Solomon Kinley was actually okay as a rookie, but he literally could not pull as a guard, and that's so important. Not to mention right now, he's not starting over Austin Jackson, so that's a red flag. And then Robert Hunt was actually decent at right tackle. That wasn't even his optimal position. His optimal position is right guard, which he's playing now, and he's playing tackle last year. It shows how much they didn't have anything when they had to play a guy who was easily better and they knew was better at guard, but they had to play him at tackle. I'm not even going to bring up the rest of the sack stats and all of that stuff because it's not really worth it. You can tell by those names it's a horrible offensive line. Again, from left to right, Austin Jackson, Eric Flowers, Ted Karras, Solomon Kinley, and Robert Hunt. That's really tough to deal with, especially as a rookie. Now, again, I couldn't get into everything because there's more I could have gotten into, but with all of that in mind, he still played decent and didn't turn over the ball. He actually had a 7-3 record, a winning record, and had decent rookie stats and still hadn't played 16 games till that point. He beat Bill Belichick with 2 rushing touchdowns, and he had amazing games against Arizona, Kansas City, and the Chargers, with pretty solid games against the Rams, who was a great defense, and Cincinnati. 1,814 yards with 14 total touchdowns and 5 interceptions, 64% completion percentage, and an 87.1 QB rating. Especially knowing all that we just went through, that's not bad. And just a note about him being pulled, and I think this went overblown and a lot of people just kept saying, oh, he got benched. Tua was on a playoff team trying to make it, and he also had Ryan Fitzpatrick, who was a starting level quarterback behind him. Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow were not trying to make the playoffs. They were nowhere near the playoffs, and they were nowhere near trying to make a playoff push. And they had nowhere near the level of backup as Ryan Fitzpatrick. You don't think Herbert would have been pulled when it's 45-0 for the Patriots if they were trying to make the playoffs and they had a better backup? They would definitely do that. Not to mention, Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow would not perform as well as they were if they were on the Dolphins dealing with what Tua had to deal with. Scheme and situation matters when you're drafted, and that's something that isn't being talked about enough because these other guys have had way more opportunity.
I personally would have preferred to see Ryan Fitzpatrick still in there because of the way that he's been playing and the way Brian Flores has that defense playing. But the truth of the matter is, Tua did not look impressive at all. There was nothing good to take away from Tua in that performance. Nothing to excoriate him for, but there was nothing to brag about either.
The national media hated him. They hated him when he hadn't even played 16 games. He only played 9. And they were defending guys like Sam Darnold and Daniel Jones who played way more games and still hadn't done anything. To me, in his rookie season, again, we're kind of far away from that, so I started bringing up all the specific stats and the advanced stats like we will for this season. But again, he played very, very decent and very, very solid, especially considering what he had to deal with. So with that being said, now let's get on to Tua's sophomore season. We will begin with the offseason for Tua and for the team, and then we'll discuss the season that it was. So for Tua, training was more about getting his health back more than translating his football skills to the NFL. Obviously, he was training and working on developing his game, but it was more about getting healthy for his second season. So improvements to his body were made, but I still think he wasn't able to just work on getting better at football. He was still trying to get back to what he was pre-injury. So it wasn't something where he could develop his skills. Obviously, he was still doing that, but it was more about getting his health back and getting back to 100% so he could go into the season healthy. Then we get to the team's offseason. We'll begin with coaching. Brian Flores obviously remained the head coach, which defensively was great, but he did not build a good staff around him other than safeties coach Gerald Alexander. That is definitely the case for the offensive side of the football. Beside him, there was no other veteran coaches that were known around the league, and he really struggled to build an offensive staff. He promoted both Eric Stoodsville, who's a running backs coach, and George Godsey to co-offensive coordinators, something that I never heard of personally, but I know it's happened before, and it's just not very common. And it clearly didn't work, but we'll get to that later. He hired a rookie offensive line coach who had limited experience as an offensive line coach for a very, very young offensive line, plus Jesse Davis. Lemuel Jean-Pierre didn't really know who he was, and now I do, trust me. He also did do something that was seemingly positive in hiring Charlie Fry, who is very closer to us, so this was one of the only moves that was seemingly positive, but it still wasn't great, but I will give him credit for hiring a person who is close to Tua to be on the coaching staff. Now let's get into some of the personnel additions in the offseason. Philip Lindsay and Duke Johnson were some running backs of note, but they were not added to the team until later in the season, but somehow Duke Johnson was the best Dolphins running back, but he was just resting on the practice squad until late into the season, until he actually got the chance to play, where he ended up being somehow the best Dolphins running back to play in that season. In the draft, they added Liam Eichenberg, who had promise as an NFL-ready, high-floor, low-ceiling type of player who played left tackle, but started training camp at left guard, but then was finally moved to left tackle where he struggled.
With the 42nd pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Miami Dolphins select Liam Eichenberg, tackle, Notre Dame.
Other than Eichenberg, the Dolphins didn't bring any outside help to their O-line other than backups who were cut to their other teams like Greg Manx and Austin Reiter. and then promoted Jesse Davis to starting right tackle. They lost Ted Karras in free agency and traded Eric Flowers to the now Washington Commanders, which in the trade they got basically nothing. Obviously, I talked a lot about the running game in the first portion of the video, so there was that big addition to the running back room after having an abysmal rushing attack in the previous season, and it was Malcolm Brown, who barely even played. So we were back to having a bottom 3, if not the worst rushing game in the league. The one positive addition came at pick number 6 in the 2021 NFL Draft, where Jalen Waddle was drafted for Tua as former teammates at Alabama. This was a slam dunk pick, and him and Tua really had a pre-built chemistry from their days at their alma mater.
With the 6th pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Miami Dolphins select Jalen Waddle, wide receiver, Alabama.
Other than that, the receivers were pretty much exactly the same as his rookie year. Actually, exactly the same, specifically because Miami did bring in Will Fuller, but he only played one game, which was with Jacoby Brissett, where he injured his season and thus missed the entire rest of the season. So he didn't play one snap with Tagovailoa. So the receivers were exactly the same outside of Jalen Waddle. So in terms of offseason, the offense was very similar, pretty much exactly the same with limited additions. Some great like Jalen Waddle, and some additions that were subtraction by addition like Jesse Davis and Liam Eichenberg. Clearly something's not adding up. So those were the moves, and judging by my lack of enthusiasm, there's not much to talk about there. While other teams like the Chargers surrounded their young quarterbacks, guys like Corey Linsley and Matt Filer, for example, not to be for the young Dolphins quarterback. With that being said, let's dive into the season. Game 1 was interesting. Tua was clearly letting the ball rip down the field more, but it still wasn't anything crazy that really moved anyone in terms of narrative. And he also had a bad interception where Mike Gesicki bobbled the ball into the hands of a Patriots defender. Not a good throw, which gave the Pats an opportunity to win, but Xavier Howard was clutch as usual and had a game-saving turnover to win the Dolphins the game. Tua had an average night with one touchdown on the ground, one in the air for himself, but also an interception to boot. The next game is where everything came crashing down. After being hit 3 times in about 5 plays, where the plays where he wasn't hit was either a throwaway or a penalty to one of the offensive linemen other than one screenplay, Tua gets hurt as one of the hits by AJ Epinesa, fractures his ribs, and he is forced to miss the next few weeks and the rest of that game. He came back against the Jaguars with another average game where he had 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, going 34 for 48. He gave the Dolphins a lead for his defense to hold, but the Flores-led defense couldn't stop an Urban Meyer-led offense, and we lost a game to Urban Meyer on a game-winning field goal to the Jaguars in London. Then we moved to the Falcons game where he actually played pretty outstanding. If this was anyone else, they'd probably say it was pretty darn great, but because it's Tua, they kind of push it down a little bit because he had 2 interceptions, but if a guy like Mahomes did this, it'd be a very different story. He put up a stat line only 25 other quarterbacks have all time, with 4 touchdowns and 80% completion percentage. He also threw 2 interceptions, which were bad throws, but one was a miscommunication/misread, and one was a bad throw where a receiver in Durham Smythe ran a bad and kind of incorrect route. Still a very, very good game for the young quarterback. Again, giving the team the lead for the defense to hold, but they could not hold the Atlanta Falcons to a stop and lost the game on another field goal. He played pretty good in those 2 games, even though they were losses, but he was still being affected by those fractured ribs. But he was more healthy for a rather bad performance against the rival Buffalo Bills, where he had no passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown, and an interception in another loss to Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. He missed the game against the Texans due to a random middle finger fracture on his left throwing hand, but he came back in the 3rd quarter against the Ravens. After the offense struggled mightily with Jacoby Brissett at the helm, Flores called upon Tua, who was somehow healthy enough to be available, just not the starter. He didn't even have his face paint on. He came in the game after halftime in less than a half. He went 8 for 13 for 150 yards and a rushing touchdown to win a primetime matchup against the Baltimore Ravens and Lamar Jackson. Then against the Jets, he had an 80% completion percentage with 273 yards and 2 touchdowns, with 1 boneheaded interception, but other than that, it was a solid game. Then against Carolina, he had an awesome game where he had an almost 90% completion percentage with a touchdown, no interceptions, and a clean win against the Panthers. Against the Giants, his stat line actually looked pretty good with a 73% completion percentage, 2 passing touchdowns, and no interceptions, but I actually thought he looked a little bit off with his ball placement at times during that game. Then, back against the Jets, he had 2 tutties and 2 interceptions in a game with ups and downs. He had an awesome throw to Devontae Parker, but also another couple bad interceptions. So a game with ups and downs, but a highlight truck of defensive back Michael Carter. Then we moved to the Saints in primetime where they started Ian Book, so he just did what he needed to do with 1 touchdown and 1 interception. Some nice throws in there, highlighted by a throw with the pocket collapsing, but he does deliver a dime to Mac Hollins down the field. Then, in his worst game of the season, in a bad weather game against the Titans, Tua struggled to get going in a game where it was win or go home for the playoffs, and other than 1 throw to Waddle, he had no touchdowns and an interception, completing less than 50% of his passes, and not even getting to the 200-yard mark in terms of passing. Just a brutal loss and brutal game. A heartbreaker, really. Tua kind of bounced back in his last game against the Pats with an average performance with his arm. He didn't really need to do much with some of these performances from the other players that they put up, but he put up 1 touchdown, no interceptions, and he only threw 20 times for 100 yards, but he did have a couple runs at the end of the game to seal the game, which were pretty nice. That was his season statistically, and it doesn't seem that great, and to be honest, it's not great, but it's not complete dog shit either, which is what some of the national media might lead you to believe. It's pretty much average.
Daniel Jones, he's a bigger player, faster. Now, he's got a turnover issue on people. You're just trying to tease me. It's Sam Darnold. Sam's going to have a very good year. Sam's bigger, stronger. Sam is a playmaker. Tua's not a playmaker.
He put up an 8-4 record of 2,600 yards and 16 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, with a 67% completion percentage. Over a full 17-game span, that equals out, on average, to 3,900 yards, 24 touchdowns, and 15 interceptions. That's not great, but it's not horrible either. He finished 7th in completion percentage and 18th in QBR. 24th in bad throw percentage, which is good to be lower obviously. It was actually 5th in on-target percentage. Tua actually finished 2nd in down the field accuracy and deep accuracy to Justin Herbert. I think he's top 2. He's top 1 or top 2 with Justin Herbert. And that might sound surprising. Obviously, he doesn't throw the ball deep that much, and that is fair. He doesn't throw the ball deep, but that's just because he can't. He doesn't have the offensive line or the players to do so. So it's not that he can't throw the ball deep, it's that he doesn't get the opportunity to throw the ball deep, which is something that I'm very excited to see going into this year, which we'll get to later. So those stats that I just listed and going over his entire season might not be that incredible, might not sound that great, but it's also not complete ass either. It's something kind of in the middle of that, so again, I called it pretty much average. But this is where I want to go get some context and go deeper with it, which shows, even though he was pretty much average, to be average with what surrounded him is pretty goddamn good. Honestly, I'm not trying to say he's great. I'm not trying to say he's a top 5, top 10 quarterback. I'm just saying he's better than it looks because of what's around him. So let's dive into it. Let's dive into the players around him, and let's dive into some stats about those players around him, which shows that he did not have the help that he needs, that all young quarterbacks need to try and succeed in this league. So getting into the things that show that it wasn't as bad as it actually looked, even though it didn't even look that bad. Tua was actually last in time of pocket at 2.1 seconds in the pocket because of a horrible offensive line and a playbook that was designed to not throw the ball deep and get the ball out quick, so it wasn't sacked due to the historically bad offensive line. It allowed 234 hurries, the most by over 40, as the team in second had 47 less hurries at 187. And this was with a playbook designed to get the ball out quickly. Imagine if it wasn't an RPO playbook. It could have been way worse, and it was already a historically bad offensive line. I don't really love PFF for their grades. I do like their stats, but not their grades per se. That's my quick stance on PFF. But they're bang on with their rating of the Dolphins as the worst O-line by far in 32nd. Tua has 3 elite traits, and one of them is pocket presence. That pocket awareness, the ability to move around in the pocket, this helped him navigate this horrible offensive line, so he only got sacked 20 times. Jacoby Brissett only played 5 games and got sacked 19 times with the same offensive line. So who was this offensive line? It was Liam Eichenberg, Austin Jackson, one of the awful backups at center, whether it was Manx, Dieter, or Ryder, Hunt, who is the only player on this offensive line who would even have a chance of starting on someone else's offensive line, and Jesse Davis. Hunt was solid, obviously, the centers were rotating, were always bad, and the 3 musketeers of Jackson, Eichenberg, and Davis were all top 10 in most pressures allowed. Eichenberg in second was 62, Davis in fourth with 57, and Jackson, who was so bad at tackle, he was moved to guard and still allowed the 8th most pressures with 49, and he missed a game. Just atrocious. The offensive line regressed somehow, even though they are young. You would think a young offensive line would only get better, or if anything, at least stay at the same level, but nope, they got worse. Austin Jackson regressed heavily after already having a pretty below average rookie season. Solomon Kinley was overweight and nowhere to be found. He couldn't even start over any of these guys, so that should tell you everything you need to know about him. Eichenberg was supposed to be this NFL-ready tackle and was the worst tackle in the league. And Jesse Davis was the worst tackle in the league, except he was old. It was so bad it felt like we abandoned the play action because if Tua had to take the time to roll out, he would have been on the ground before he could say hut. Oh, and I almost forgot. I can't believe I almost forgot this. When the offensive line was clearly struggling in training camp, Flores and Greer decided, maybe draft bust Greg Little and Isaiah Wilson could help this out. Obviously, it did nothing, and they weren't good in the running game either. Gaskin regressed, as well as Ahmed. Malcolm Brown barely played, and Duke Johnson was called upon to rescue the running back room, and he was okay. We were awful in the run game. We were bottom 3 in rushing yards per game last year. It was just not good. There's not much to say here. It was just plain awful. Gaskin averaged 3.5 yards per carry. Salvin Ahmed averaged 2.8 yards per carry. Duke Johnson was the only running back to average over 4 yards per carry, but he only started 4 games. Tua was 4th in rushing yards. Malcolm Brown only got 33 attempts on the entire year and didn't do much with them. Philip Lindsay was on the team, but isn't even worth mentioning. But that was just an awful display of running the ball. Receiving wise, it was basically just Jalen Waddle. He had great chemistry with Tua and put up 104 receptions and over 1,000 yards. In 16 games, he broke the rookie reception record, and this was all while being used as an underneath wide receiver, and generally utilized incorrectly. Mike Gesicki actually had 780 yards, but really disappeared in the second half of the season, and he only had 2 touchdowns. After that, it's Devontae Parker, who couldn't stay healthy again, only starting in 8 games and having 515 receiving yards. Preston Williams, who generated chemistry with Tua, was stapled to the bench due to poor play and being in Flores' doghouse. Then it's Durham Smythe, who is a solid blocking tight end who can serve as a possession guy in the vertical game. And then we get to Mac Hollins, so we're reaching at the bottom of the barrel now. That's not a little bit disrespectful. I actually like Mac Hollins. I hope he does well with Las Vegas. I'm not going to go deeper than that. Other than Waddle was tough to watch due to poor plays and not having the ability to separate unless your name is Jalen Waddle, really held the team back as they could not get open. Devontae Parker only averaged 1.7 yards of separation, whilst only having a 55% catch percentage. It's so bad that after Jalen Waddle, Myles Gaskin led the team in yards after catch. He's not even a receiver, he's a running back. And third is the tight end in Mike Gesicki, who is basically a receiver, but still he's listed as a tight end. So all of this to say, outside of Jalen Waddle and the first half of the season of Mike Gesicki, there's nothing to work with. While writing this, I almost forgot about Will Fuller being on the Dolphins. That's how forgettable he is. He played that one game, had the finger injury, and poof, he was gone. All of this to say, you can see how bad it really was with Tua Tagovailoa, with the rest of this team. The defense is awesome, but the offense really had nothing to work with outside of Jalen Waddle. Brian Flores clearly did not have a good relationship with Tua Tagovailoa, which is really important for a young quarterback. So there just wasn't a lot to work with. It's so bad that there was a report recently that Tua didn't even want to be a team captain because he would have to spend extra time meeting with Brian Flores. Clearly there wasn't a good relationship between the head coach and the young starting quarterback. Obviously Brian Flores was part of the people who wanted to get Deshaun Watson, but I cannot blame him specifically for that because it does seem like Chris Greer and Stephen Ross were in that boat too. Definitely not a great situation for a young quarterback to succeed in. I am being harsh here, but I think I'm being very real as well. Obviously, there are a couple positives with Jalen Waddle, but other than Jalen Waddle and other than that, I'm being very real here. The offensive line was historically bad. It wasn't just 32nd, it was historically bad. Out of all the offensive lines that have been 32nd in the last few years, this one is clearly the worst. The running game has never been addressed. And receiving wise, we tried to add Will Fuller, but he didn't even play a snap with Tua Tagovailoa. So all of this to say, I think there's some misconceptions with Tua and his statistics. I think there's a lot of people look at his statistics and say, wow, he's just bad. He's inaccurate, he throws boneheaded interceptions. But I think if he was able to just not throw that one boneheaded interception or that one boneheaded bad throw per game, his stats would be even better. And that's with all of this going on. And now finally, we get to this year, this offseason, which I'm so excited for. And that's where we get to the title of this video and why I think Tua Tagovailoa is bound to break out this year. He had an inability to have a good relationship with his general manager and Chris Greer, who he wasn't on speaking terms with at the end of last season, his quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, and it's also pretty well known that Xavier Howard had his issues with the coach. At one point he had asked for a trade, as well as recently he just got a tattoo of a peace sign on his neck because he's still at peace now that a certain someone is gone.
Is the peace sign new? I haven't noticed that before.
Yeah, it's new, yeah.
What's the story behind that?
You know, I'm at peace right now, man. I'm happy where I'm at.
His defense and his defensive mind was awesome. I loved his gritty mindset. But outside of that, it was pretty rough once you actually take a second to look deeper at the situation and not just take a glance at the team's record. Then, we made the hire that I'm most excited about. During the head coaching search, I made it clear Mike McDaniel was my guy. Follow me on Twitter at 416J. And thankfully, the Miami Dolphins agreed to making him the 14th head coach in Dolphins history. He's an offensive mastermind who has been at Kyle Shanahan's hip for the duration of his coaching career thus far. He was behind helping make RG3 one of the most electric players in football. He was also the genius behind the prolific running game of the San Francisco 49ers, reinventing the game with things like the inside toss, and just an overall spectacular rushing offense. San Francisco ranked 7th in rushing yards per game, with a late round pick leading the way in Elijah Mitchell. He runs an outside zone offensive scheme, which he will bring here and actually use the run game, which is something the Dolphins haven't done in years. He wants to use the run game to set up the pass and put Tua in a position to succeed. He clearly knows what he's doing with an offense and has a way with players in terms of development and helping them play to their best.
We show people and give reason as to why we're doing stuff and get them to buy in, not necessarily for us, maybe it is, but it's for their fucking teammates. So we have this clinic tape, widen, push, crack, and people have always commented on Shanahan's receivers and the way they block. It's because he takes the time to emphasize it, and you get what you emphasize. Right. And the way you emphasize it is you hold everyone accountable to each other. Say, do you want to run 4-yard plays? Because we can. But I promise you, if we're trying to get explosive fucking runs, receivers have to block safeties and corners.
He also did something Flores couldn't. hiring one of the best coaching staffs the Miami Dolphins have had in a long time. He hired Frank Smith to be his offensive coordinator. He was the one to completely overhaul the Chargers' offensive line. He hired Darrell Bevell as his pass game coordinator and quarterbacks coach, which might be the best coaching staff hiring of the offseason, as he probably should have landed an offensive coordinator job somewhere. He actually coached the likes of Russell Wilson, as well as served as the Jaguars' interim head coach after Urban Meyer was fired. He demoted Stootsville back to running backs coach, where he actually thrived. He brought over these two coaches from San Francisco and Wes Welker to become the wide receivers coach, as well as John Embry to head the tight end room. Both coaching working wonders with the 49ers players. John Embry played a role in helping George Kittle become what he is. He also brought in Matt Applebaum to replace Lemuel Jean-Pierre as offensive line coach after that disastrous season. Matt Applebaum was with Boston College and was helping players like Zion Johnson become a first-round draft selection. Mike McDaniel completely overhauled the offensive coaching staff, and thank God he did. It seems like he has a great relationship with all the players, and specifically Tua.
It's been cool. It's been different. Like I said, I've never been around a coach like this, who's just extremely positive. Yeah, swaggy. That's what I got to say about Coach Mike. I call him Mystic Mac. Just like Conor McGregor, this dude, he loves to predict stuff. So call him Mystic Mac. But, the respect that he has in the locker room is tremendous. The guys love him. Yeah, I would say that's just something that Mike would always try to get me to do, is just open up to him in the hallway or in the meeting room. He just pop in. When I'm lifting, he just want to chat. Every opportunity he got. And so, I ended up opening up a little bit to him.
Chris Greer also stepped up his game as a facilitating general manager, as he and McDaniel worked together to overhaul this offensive personnel as much as possible and fit McDaniel's scheme. They brought in Teddy Bridgewater to back up Tua in case of injury, but we all hope that he doesn't have to play a single snap. Running backs wise, they completely overhauled the room, bringing in players like Raheem Mostert, whose only issue has been injuries. He's never averaged under 5 yards per attempt and is familiar with the scheme McDaniel wants to run. They also brought in Chase Edmonds, who is already an above average complementary back, with the potential to become maybe more than that. He's a good pass blocker with awesome hands out of the backfield, and is adept at being an elusive runner out of the backfield. Later in the offseason, we brought in Sony Michel, who I think is being underrated. He just put up 812 rushing yards and 4.5 yards per carry. He also fills a role which no other back does on the roster, which is packing a punch. He was a top 20 running back in yards after contact, which is something I feel like I haven't seen since Jay Ajayi. And then our starting running back from the last 2 years will be fighting for the 4th running back spot on the team if they even decide to go with 4 running backs. With Salvin Ahmed, who's always worked with Mike McDaniel previously, and Zaquandre White, who's an undrafted free agent but is playing well at OTAs.
I've been very impressed with, I call him Dr. White. But there's plenty of guys.
They've also redone the offensive line to hopefully make them at least average. I still think there's some work to do, but it's a great start in trying to make this offensive line a top 15 line going forward. Robert Hines staying as he's always been solid, and they also brought in a top 3 left tackle in Tron Armstead when he's on the field, and he fits the outside zone scheme seamlessly. They also brought in Connor Williams in the interior of this offensive line, who's a very solid player. If he didn't have as many penalties as he did last year, he might have been a Pro Bowler. Over the course of his career, he doesn't usually take that many penalties, so last year was an outlier. So if he can tune those flags down, he could be an awesome player. Center/left guard and right tackle are still major gaps in the offensive line, and Austin Jackson's athleticism, there's a tiny chance he becomes usable due to his traits. He has the build and traits to succeed in the system. Now it's time to see if with adept coaching, his technique can match his athleticism and become an NFL quality tackle. Center and left guard is a gap because right now it seems Connor Williams is being moved to center, and Eichenberg will be slotting into left guard. I'm hoping we bring in someone who's not on the roster who's either center to push Williams back to guard, or at worst, a better guard option in case Eichenberg can't translate to guard. Just because he's always been a tackle, I don't know if he has the base to become a guard, but that's for another time. Finally, we can get to the receivers. Devontae Parker was finally let go and was replaced by Cedric Wilson. Cedric Wilson seems to be underutilized on his pass team in the Cowboys, so he has a lot of potential with more usage. He shined with more opportunity in Dallas. Lynn Bowden Jr. is back to being healthy with the team after missing all of last year, and during Tua's rookie year, he really played really well. River Craycraft and Trent Sherfield also have the chance to make the roster due to their pre-existing relationship with Mike McDaniel. And finally, the trade that no one saw coming, Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill is a Miami Dolphin. I don't think I need to break down the statistics to show why Tyreek Hill is an ungodly addition to this team. Teams can stop one Tyreek Hill, now they have to stop 2 with Jalen Waddle be on the roster, becoming the best number 2 wideout in football. Not to mention Mike Gesicki and Cedric Wilson and all the running backs and Tua Tagovailoa. So, this is why I believe Tua is bound to break out this year in 2022. He's finally getting the pieces around him to actually have a chance of succeeding in this league. Other quarterbacks have already had the pieces that Tua finally has now gotten the chance to have. He was already performing at low, which is pretty darn good considering everything that was happening around him. So imagine now what he can do with these pieces around him. A head coach who can run an offense and actually believes in him, and the kicker, he's finally healthy. Finally having an offseason to not just focus on rehabilitating and getting healthy, but to purely just get better at being a quarterback in the NFL. Finally being able to work on those off-schedule throws and making those throws to zip on a 15-yard out to the sideline. I'm excited to see what the kid can do with an actual chance this year. He's bound to break out. I'll leave you with this. This was clearly a video of me defending Tua, and that might be an understatement, but I do like Tua, and do I want him to be the future? Absolutely. But if he doesn't have it this year, you have to consider options. But there's nothing to hold him back now, and he's ready to be unleashed. Thanks for watching. See you next time.